All right, glad to be back with our next guest. Never sure if people never know if you're amused by the dancing or immensely uncomfortable.
No one knows. We're all uncomfortable.
He has a film out right now. It's just going gangbusters. A book of the same name, Hillary's America. You already know who he is. You can run a Google search and find him. Dinesh D'Souza, thanks for being here, sir.
It's great to be on the show.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. And full disclosure to people listening, Dinesh and I have worked on side projects before. So people go, why don't you have Dinesh on? And I'm like, well, he's really busy and he's above the show, so let's just not drag him through it. But your film and the book is doing really well. Obviously, you had kind of Obama's America before. Was the goal deliberately to try and affect the election or just to educate people?
Well, the goal is to educate people in an election year. So I would say there's some of both. The Obama film that I did 4 years ago was just about one man. It was just about the secret history of Obama because so little was known about him.
Right.
But Obama was an isolated guy. In some ways, he's been detached from the Democratic, his own party, for 8 years. Hillary is the leader of a gang, and it is this progressive gang. It's the Democratic gang. So rather than make a movie just on Hillary, I don't think she's quite as interesting as Obama, to be honest. I decided to make a movie on the Hillary gang. How did it get started? What kind of rackets did it pull? What happened when it got busted? How did it go on to new things? How did it cover up its tracks? So it's actually good. It's a little bit of a Godfather movie, I have to say.
Right. Well, okay, so speaking of that, you make an airtight case, and people should definitely watch it. But that brings us to when you debated Genk of the Young Turks. I watched this. I thought, okay, I'm going to have to see this, having been on YouTube and seeing Politicon and what they do. And I remember, okay, let me lay the foundation for people who haven't seen it. We've talked about this. Right away, they debate. I'll let Dinesh describe it. I thought, well, this is a different animal from what Dinesh is used to because people are usually respectful. He's debated people like Christopher Hitchens. I'm not sure Sam Harris or Dawkins, but they repeat debate because they have mutual respect. And in this,
and politically, I've debated Jesse Jackson. I've debated the guys on the far left. I debated Bill Ayers at Dartmouth. Actually, we did a couple of debates, one in Michigan, I believe. So I've debated not only the liberals, but the far left. So in that sense, I'm accustomed. But generally, my approach has been to maintain good relations with these guys, to have a debate that's feisty but cordial, and that has some respect for intellectual integrity. In other words, a debate in which you won't have somebody who ignores facts or pretends that things that are true are not true. And so with Genk, this was quite a surreal experience because I wasn't quite accustomed to a creature like Genk.
Well, you know, it's absolutely true. He's gone after me for a long time and then provided no recourse. So we did a parody of it, and we've done parodies kind of even on this show with it. I remember the first thing he put up, he goes, "Your own audience thought you lost." Right afterwards, he puts up a Twitter poll. And that flipped not long after. Once people, because you have those initial people liking and downvoting things before they've watched it.
It's kind of a silliness because obviously, I mean, I have a following that is many times the size of his, so I could easily overwhelm him in any of those sorts of polls. But I was thinking really just more of the actual debate itself, where he'd say things like, you say that blacks were better off under slavery, and I say, no, I don't say that. But what I say is what Muhammad Ali said. Ali, of course, when he came back from the rumble in the jungle, made the famous remark. Someone asked him, "Hey, champ, what do you think of Africa?" And he goes, "Thank God my granddaddy got on that boat." But behind the sort of pungent remark, Ali was making a serious point, which is that, look, his great-great-great-grandfather was worse off. But he, Muhammad Ali, is better off for living in America. He wouldn't be the world champion if he had been born probably in some other place like Afghanistan. So he's making an obvious point that the descendants of slavery are lucky to be living in the orbit of Western freedom. So I'd make a point like this, and Genk would start laughing uproariously. There you go. That's just what I said. So.
How many hands think slavery's good? Dinesh thinks slavery's good. Of course it's not good, right? I would watch it.
The kind of intellectual thuggery, and what I don't know if he's a sophisticated man who's putting on an act, or if he actually is what he presents himself to be, which would, of course, be far worse.
Well, God, talk about, so this is what he's very cordial, but it cuts like a knife, even worse.
Ooh.
I mean, and the funny thing is he would bring up stuff that you've already, this is what I've noticed, and I say this respectfully because, like you said, you've been with people who are intellectual heavyweights, and I think you would probably agree, win some, lose some, it goes back and forth. You've had better nights and worse nights, but I've always known you to maintain good relationships, as you've said. In this case, the technique is different, and I want to get into because you've sort of bridged more traditional media with new media better than a lot of people. You debate and I think a lot of people you've debated, they're arguing to try and convince the audience of their argument. People like Genk, and this is sort of generational, this new generation of far leftists, they use the audience to try and intimidate their opposition. Did you notice that stark contrast?
Yeah, well, Genk had a kind of a robot crew that was in the audience, and I think these were real people, but they might have been robots. I'm really not sure. But in any event, every time Genk would say something, including the most pedestrian statements, like he would mention George Bush, this audience would then mechanically jump up and down and start shouting and applauding. So almost like Genk was controlling them through a kind of a device of some sort. It was unbelievably frightening because these are young people who are in a formative stage of life, and you think there would be some intellectual openness, some curiosity, that their idealism would have some search quality to it. But no, these appear to be just sort of, either paid robots or just mechanized robots. And so you got a sense of what, these, when you think of the mass movements of the 20th century, people cheering for Castro or cheering for Stalin, this sort of thing, this mass phenomenon, I got a little glimpse of it in Politicon that day.
Okay, couple quick questions. Did you and Genk shake hands off camera? Was he friendly? Did you make nice or no?
I was certainly cordial with him, but I think what upset me wasn't so much his personal incivility. It wasn't that. It was just more that there was a certain kind of intellectual unwillingness to, like he'd say something like, well, as you know, Dinesh, all the Dixiecrats in the Democratic Party then became Republicans. And I would say, well, I'm familiar with the case of Strom Thurmond, but can you name a second case? Now, obviously, he couldn't, but he would say something like, there you go again, using your good old debating tactics. Now, of course, we're in a debate, so you think debating tactics would kind of be, if anywhere that they'd be legitimate, it would be there. But this unwillingness to even, entertain a counter-argument, I just got the sense that I was debating a wall.
But was he nice to you afterward? Was he nicer, because he was incredibly malicious and personal.
Yeah, he was cordial, but he wasn't friendly. And by the way, just by way of comparison, if I look at the whole range of the atheists, for example, Hitchens and I were genuinely friends. I mean, we would have a pizza after the debate. Now, there are other guys I've debated, like Daniel Dennett, more pompous and so on. And so Dennett was the kind of guy who kind of felt like outside the debate, he should be cordial but not friendly. And Genk was that way. He was withdrawn, didn't say much. He shook my hand and so on. But it was the intellectual incivility within the debate that I thought was particularly appalling.
Well, it did look like as it went on, you looked increasingly uncomfortable because you were going like, it was just anytime you would make a factual statement, it got very personal. Of course, you went to prison. He did it. He went to prison. Of course. That was his whole thing. And he kept going back to it, or nobody sees your movies. Everything was remarkably personal. If you go,
and I don't mind it being personal. In other words, I would come back and say things like, Genk, okay, look, I did exceed the campaign finance law, but justice isn't a matter of did you do it, but it's also a matter of does the penalty fit the crime? The other guys who did the same thing get the same penalty. So I maintain that no person in American history has ever been locked up for doing what I did. So a normal person now on the other side would go, wow, if we're claiming that this is progressive justice, that's a problem. I need to find at least some other cases where other guys got the same penalty. Otherwise, Dinesh has in fact been railroaded. I never got the sense with Genk that even after the debate, he would make such an inquiry. This is a kind of a guy, he almost defines closed-mindedness in a way that I've not encountered before. And so I was a little bit, it's almost like I felt like an anthropologist. I wanted to take out my equipment and begin to study his insides because I haven't quite encountered a Genk before.
He wanted to go Dr. Grant, sweeping off the Velociraptor claws. Only take a lot of digging to get to the center of Genk. So I ask you that because is it true there are no cases what would they say are cases similar to yours, or is there nothing? Because I did look into it specifically comparable to yours, and I didn't find anything, but that doesn't mean something
there are cases. And we know this because we search for them. I have a legal team that looked for them because when you go before a judge, you have to be prepared. The government looked really hard because they wanted to tell the judge, look, there are all these cases where these guys have gotten, but in fact, all the cases that they came up with involved corruption. In other words, someone is trying to buy an appointment or someone is trying to get a favor through a lawmaker. In my case, the candidate didn't even know. So there was no corruption involved or even alleged. And that's what makes this case particularly interesting. I think it will it's gonna go down in campaign finance history as a kind of a blip, a very interesting case that people will look at and go, what was that all about?
Right. Well, people either have to say either he's the dumbest criminal in history who received no benefit whatsoever, or it's just something that's happened all the time. And like you said, they've railroaded him. And I think you've just touched on something. I've talked about this with the Second Amendment, the famous Heller case. The argument that loses that's presented is equally important, or the opposition argument. If there were a case, like you're saying, it would be in their best interest to say, well, here you go, here's a directly comparable case, open and shut. The fact that they weren't able to was very telling. And this is one thing, too. We've gotten into this with Facebook by filing a legal motion. You and I both know that what happens legally in a court that is legally observable is very different from social media drama. And you've been in both realms. You've been in the academic realm. You've been in the legal realm. And then this new social media realm, which you see with people like Genk. The good side is anyone can have a voice. The bad part of that is that you have a lot of hacks who can still develop these huge followings just through dirt slinging. So does that concern you, the way it's shifting, bridging that gap? Do you think that's kind of just a small trend, a small blip, or do you think it could be dangerous?
Well, I think that you're quite right, Stephen, that it could be a real benefit to democracy that we've got this kind of open channel, and that the kind of arguments that were previously confined to the Oxford Debating Society or PBS are now accessible to people, and people can not only listen, they can participate. And what I try to do is bridge the gap between academia and sort of popular discourse by speaking in a very conversational way. And I do this in the movie and in the book. So, for example, in Hillary's America, I make this claim. It's pretty startling. I say, in 1860, the year of the Civil War, no Republicans owned a slave. I say all the slaves in the United States, in the whole country, were owned by Democrats. Now, this is a very arresting factual claim. There's a very easy way to refute it. Hey, Dinesh, here is a list of 10 Republicans who own slaves,
exactly.
Right? I would have to retract the statement. But no one has been able to do that. So this is actually the way that I think public discourse should happen. It should happen by asserting and counter-asserting claims, by marshaling evidence, by making it accessible to people. And again, I'm not saying that there's no one on the progressive side who does that, because I think there probably are. Interestingly, with this movie and book, the left has not put anyone of any caliber up against us who's been able to seriously challenge, let alone refute, a single claim in the book or the movie.
That's a very important point. I think they attack you more in style, kind of like you're saying you bridge the gap, and they're going, well, he's a former intellectual who's become pedestrian. But like you've said, it's making this accessible to people. And if anyone has read your books, frankly, my parents made me read Letters to a Young Christian, and being the young comedian smartass that I was like, this is kind of dry. It's very intellectually written. And something new, you do both of those things, and you get railroaded regardless.
Yeah, I mean, early in my career, I wrote books that were scholarly, that were supported by footnotes. Now I do that, but I also try very hard to make those books. My assumption in writing now is I assume my reader knows nothing about the subject, but is also really intelligent.
Right. Okay, hold that thought. We will be back with more Dinesh D'Souza. If you change the channel, you're a bigot. That's the rule. That's the rule. And now, Roger Ailes advises Donald Trump.
Okay, listen, frankly, I'm thrilled. Okay, I think we've got a crack squad here. We're really going to turn this thing around, all right? Because truthfully, all right, frankly, I got to be honest with my voters, okay? I'm not going to pivot. I'm not Scottie Pippen. I'm going to be me. Okay, Roger, I want to... Roger. Hey, Roger, quit motorboating Megyn Kelly. We got work to do, okay? Hey, Roger, quit motorboating Megyn Kelly.
Stay tuned for more.
You're a strange animal, that's what I know. But you're a strange animal, I got to follow.
Back. Glad to be back. Bringing my microphone, and I'm not going to dance that long. This is a special guest, Jared. Dinesh D'Souza, Hillary's America. Of course, it's available. It's available on DVD, digital, as well as paperback and hardcover. All of the above.
There you go.
I don't know. When will that be coming to beta?
Okay. Don't jump the gun. So the DVD of the movie comes out in October. It's not available yet. It's still in theaters. and we're going to do an expanded release in September. If you let me, Hillary'sAmericaTheMovie.com, that's the website. That'll tell you where it's playing near you.
Absolutely. Sorry, that's right. A little bit of timing there, where it's both released in theaters and the DVD before the election. I see where he's noodling it. I do highly recommend it. You have definitely, regardless of where people line up politically, we've talked about this. Most conservative content is crap, particularly as far as documentaries. They've been really bad. They've been embarrassingly bad. There are a few standouts, but it definitely seems, even if you look at your hiring practices and the way these films are shot, that you've made it a point to step up in quality. Was that your mission from the outset, or is it just something that happened organically?
Well, no, I knew nothing about making movies 4 years ago when I undertook 2016, but I did know that Christian and conservative movies tend to be sort of subpar, and that people feel a sense of duty. I've got to go to support the movie. Now, I don't want people to go to support my movie. I want people to go to be entertained and to learn a bunch of stuff and to come up moved and inspired and fired up. And so I wanted to make that type of a movie. Now, 2016 is that type of a movie, but it's also a simpler movie. It's the kind of movie that you could have shot on a handheld, a very nice handheld camera. But now that we're doing recreations of history and recreations of politics, we do them at a very sophisticated level. So, for example, the confinement center prison scenes in this movie, there are people who thought I actually shot them in prison. I couldn't, because actually my judge issued an order that I can't film my confinement, I can't film my teaching of English to immigrants, and I can't film my psychiatric counseling, which I'm sure you, Stephen, would have loved to see, the re-education of Dinesh D'Souza.
I would also want to get the name of your doctor. It could probably help me out.
It was an effort that failed, and my rehabilitation has been proclaimed incomplete.
Right. Well, it's one thing to have, obviously, to seek help on your own. It's another to have a psychiatric evaluation and rehabilitation mandated, and then the end result isn't the opinion they want, maybe, and they go, well, listen, the guy's still conservative.
This is a scary thing about guys like Genk is that, generally I would feel that with a good-willed guy on the other side, like I have no desire to lock up Michael Moore or ruin him financially or subject him to psychiatric. I would never think that way. But these guys think that way, or some of them do. There's a sort of authoritarian streak where they go, well, yeah, I'm really glad he got that man. Wish we could have kept him, under the gun for longer. And so this is the totalitarian streak that you see in the left, and it characterizes Hillary, and it characterizes a fair number of her goons.
Well, I believe, too, that obviously a form of open ideas is best for the conservative or libertarian argument. That's always what I've maintained. And so have you seen, with good example, unedited, the Dinesh Genk debate? I would recommend you go review it. Of course, go to go see Hillary's America. But this is something that was very compelling to me. Have you noticed, since that is as open and unedited as could possibly be, an influx of new fans from that, because they just go, all right, I haven't seen this before?
Well, I noticed two things. One is that I noticed that an influx of new fans, a lot of younger people, who wouldn't normally have probably come across my work. The other thing is I went on the Young Turks channel and I began to look at the feedback on Genk's site. Now, while the feedback on my site is 99% positive, on Genk's site it was running about 50-50. And a lot of people were like, Genk, I thought you were a reasonable guy, but to see you go on like an intellectual goon at this debate, I was a little bit embarrassed for you and embarrassed for myself for being your fan. And so I was kind of interested to see this kind of stuff on Genk's own site. And I'm sure Genk was, thinking, I mean, I don't know what Genk thinks, but I thought it was significant that even on the Young Turks side, you probably have some young people who are more intellectually open-minded than their host.
Well, I used to get that a lot because, as you know, I've been on YouTube for years, and I was the only one there. It was just an empty desert. And as a Christian, and of course the Young Turks, when they were a little smaller, would go after me, and they would, I hate you. And then they go, you know what? I've kind of flipped on this. Even if they're an atheist, even if they would completely disagree with, for example, your debate with Hitchens, they've grown up a little bit and they've recognized, you know what? I thought Genk was this anti-corporate, not just Genk. I don't want to doggy pile on him, but a lot of leftists who've presented themselves as these anti-establishment, anti-authoritarians who've ironically become the man. And you're definitely seeing an exodus, not massive, but it's noticeable. And does that give you hope in kind of this area of a very cracked conservative movement with Trump and never Trump?
Yeah, well, on the left, you've seen these sites like Gawker and Daily Beast and Mediaite and so on, and you've got these guys, and many of them are, 2 years out of college, and they don't know anything, so they'll say things to me like, Dinesh, have you ever heard of the Nixon Southern strategy? And I'm like. Yeah, not only have I heard about it, I've written extensively about these things. I wrote a 2,000-page book called The End of Racism. I'm very familiar with all these things, but they have this sort of idiot way of lecturing me about things sort of everything that they know on the topic was my starting point 20 years ago. So I don't quite know what to make of this. I try to engage them in dialogue by saying things like, well, who actually won the Deep South in '68? It really wasn't Nixon. It was the segregationist Democrat Wallace. And that Nixon won the Upper South, so the least racist South. As the South became less racist, it became more Republican. So I'd love to have real debates about these things like the big switch and so on. But the quality of the debate, I mean, it throws me back to when I was 20 and I looked up to people like Irving Kristol, Bill Buckley, Solzhenitsyn, Hayek, Milton Friedman. And I realized that those guys were writing in small magazines and in different forums, and the world is different now. But it is pathetic to see the lowering of the intellectual lowering that has happened between then and now.
Right. I think you're smart to say, I assume that the audience knows nothing, but is not an idiot. We've run into that a lot with Second Amendment issues where we assume, right, sort of like a tree. Okay, there's a branch, semi-automatic, then you get to assault weapons, clips versus magazines, and then you realize you're still at the trunk. They don't know what semi-automatic means. So you go, okay, let's back this up. They're not idiots. They just don't know anything about this given subject. And so I do appreciate you bridging that gap, because there aren't a lot of people doing it. They're either in academia or they're hacks like us who are dancing along to techno bumps. Dinesh, we're going to go to a web extended after this. The website right before we go?
Hillary'sAmerica.themovie.com. And then the book is available in Costco and Barnes & Noble, everywhere else you can get books.
This is true. Louderwithcrowder.com.